So this paper is about Aboutness, and that picture is about Werner Keusters, who is the co-author of the paper. And it occurs to me that I could probably spend the whole 25 minutes just talking about the Aboutness in this one slide. But I have other slides which are about the Information Artifact Ontology, which has been around for some years now and which is providing terms which are being reused in many other ontologies because Aboutness is so central to so many of the things that we do. Now, the central term in the Information Artifact Ontology is Information Content Entity, ICE. And information content entities are things like journal articles, but also a price that you see in a price list, or a musical score, or a particular quaver in a musical score. All of these are examples of information content entities. When we send an email, what is common to the thing we see on our screen and the thing that our recipient sees on their screen is an information content entity. Now, in order to understand information content entities, we need to understand the idea of specific dependence. So your headache is specifically dependent upon your head. That just means that your headache can't exist without your head. It's your head's headache. And you can find a lot more information about questions of definition of terms like specifically dependent continuant in this book, which is, so I think I'm allowed some shameless advertising because it's going to be appearing in exactly 2 weeks' time. Now, side by side with specific dependence is generic dependence. Your headache is specifically dependent upon your head, but the PDF file on your laptop is only generically dependent upon the memory store in your laptop, because the PDF file can migrate from one laptop to another. So there are dependent entities which are tied to their bearers, and there are dependent entities which can move around from one bearer to another. Information content entities are copyable. They are migratable in that sense. And so the current definition in IAO of ICE is that an information content entity is a generically dependent continuant that is, and then we get to the point of this presentation, about something. And I'm going to try and work out what about something might mean. And in order to do this, we have to understand that the information content entities with which we have to deal, which range from single words all the way up to entire encyclopedias, have complicated multi-threaded aboutness in which non-aboutness is mixed in. Sometimes in such a way that we are aware of the non-aboutness, sometimes in such a way that we are not aware of the non-aboutness, and sometimes in such a way that we, anyway, we'll see the examples in a minute. So concretizations, I'm going to have to deal with the fact that information content entities are concretized in paper printouts or in arrays of pixels on a screen, or in carvings in stone, gravestones, and so forth. So GDCs can migrate from one place to another. Whenever they migrate, they start out being concretized in one pattern of ink or pixels or carving, and they end in another pattern, which is a very similar pattern of ink or pixels or carving. So they are concretizations. Now, to see the importance of aboutness, if we look at the OBI, which is a representation of biomedical and indeed any kind of scientific investigation, then we see that almost half of the main terms of OBI, the yellow ones, are information content entity terms. On the top, we have the protocols, and on the bottom, at the very end, we have the publication. We also, at the top, would have the grant proposal, the reviews of the grant proposal, and so forth. And then, not least importantly, we have the data. And the data can exist either as generically dependent continuants, the file in your laptop which you send to your friend, or it can consist of charts which are filled in by hand to create ink patterns. All right, now those ink patterns are information quality entities. DNA sequences are examples of such information quality entities, and information content entities concretized in paper or pixels are another example. All right, now IAO doesn't say very much about aboutness, and so that's what I'm going to be talking about now. So the first question is, what is aboutness? And the big question here is the expression James Bond about anything? Or Sherlock Holmes, or Higgs boson, assuming that we hadn't found it. So this is an important question for some people. I don't know if Stefan is in the room. He is, yes. Stefan likes to think about unicorns, if that were only possible. I don't think you can think about unicorns for the obvious reason that there aren't any unicorns. But Stefan is... Stefan has a certain unicorn thing. How does aboutness relate to the reference of language? What are representations, which is a word which is often used when talking about aboutness, and what is information? So is information what is captured in information content entities? So I'm going to try and understand some of those questions with regard to the issues raised by the James Bond kind of case. So first of all, I want to redefine, or we want to redefine information content entity somewhat more carefully. An information content entity now is about some portion of reality, and the portion of reality can be very general. It just must be a portion of reality. So it could be a person, it could be, well, I have a list actually. It could be a universal spy, for instance. Could be a relation, so we have whole papers about relations or object properties. It could be another information content entity. So I said a few minutes ago some things about the information content entity, which is concretized by the phrase James Bond, which I'm now writing in the air and doing this with my fingers. And then finally, and most importantly, configurations. Configurations are portions of reality which whole true sentences are about. So Barack Obama is the current president of the United States of America is about a corresponding configuration. All right, now, I think that the aboutness of patterns of ink or patterns of pixels is parasitic on the aboutness of cognitive representations in people's heads. So a given pattern of ink or a given pattern of pixels will be about something only if it's at least possible that somebody should concretize that pattern of ink or pixels in their head and thereby have a cognitive representation. And ultimately, the cognitive representation bottoms out in observations on the part of nurses of actual blood pressure phenomena in a hospital. So representations include cognitive representations which serve as the basis for the directedness or aboutness of patterns of ink and patterns of pixels, which in turn serve as the concretizations for the information content entities which can migrate from one mind to another mind or from one laptop to another laptop. Now, those representations are like Lego brick structures in the sense that they have units, in some cases anyway, which are themselves representations, but which have no parts which are representations. Ontology terms are very often representational units in that sense. There are composite ontology terms, but the non-composite ontology terms are representational units. And now there are at least 5 types of representational units. And notice that representational units do not need to represent anything. James Bond is an example. So, the ones that represent, for instance, Paris, then the ones that don't represent, for instance, Middle Earth. So there is no such place as Middle Earth. And what I just said is not about Middle Earth, because there is no such place. But we all know that. But in 1860, Leverrier didn't know that the representational unit Vulcan didn't refer to anything. He thought it did. He made a mistake. He was wrong. But he was using a representational unit, a bad one, which is why we don't follow him in his use of that term. When the term Vulcan is used in Star Trek, we all recognize, well, most of us anyway, recognize that this is not a referring representational unit. It's a non-referring representational unit. And then finally, there are representational unit components, which are too small to be representational units. And an example would be the le in Leverrier. All right, case study. Obama is president of the United States. Obama is about Obama, president is about the office, and United States is about the country. And the whole thing is about a certain portion of reality, which is the configuration which makes it true that Obama is president of the United States. Obama is president of Russia is about Obama, it's about the office of the president, and it's about Russia. But it's not about any configuration, because it's false. So in this way, we can do justice to the fact that a sentence like Obama is president of Russia is an information content entity because it has aboutness, without having to assume that there is anything which it, the whole information content entity, is about. Now, I guess that's probably enough. So just one more point and then I'll stop. In order to have a representation of something, you do not need to know what it is. So a cat can see a mass cytometer. A baby can see a mass cytometer. They can have a representation of a mass cytometer, which is there in front of them, but they don't know what it is. And so this then finally can help us throw some light on the Higgs boson. There were at one stage believers in Higgs bosons, nice people, perfectly honest. Unlike, well, I didn't want to say unlike Stefan because that would sound rude, but when Stefan thinks he's thinking about unicorns, he is in some ways comparable to those nice people who were thinking about Higgs bosons, but they were successful by accident. And the case of the Higgs boson believers before there was evidence for the existence of the Higgs boson shows that aboutness does not imply that the subject knows that what he is representing exists. And I think I will just, you have to have some belief that what you are representing exists. And it's a question whether Stefan has that belief. But it doesn't require knowledge. And I'll stop there. So this is a great mystery. I don't know even how I'm able to understand your question. I'm not even sure I am able to understand your question, since, of course, and now I will just repeat what you just said, but I won't repeat it because that will just get me into even more trouble. We can't say those things because there are no entities which they are about. We can just produce patterns of ink in the atmosphere. Yes?
Yeah, I would say that it's easy to represent this because you would just say there are, let's say, two universals. One is horse, and the other one is animal with horn. Yeah?
Yeah.
Both have their extensions. For instance, the horses in the world, and then also the other thing, other beasts.
Behorned beasts.
Yeah, behorned beasts. Yeah. And then it's just the statement that the intersection of these two sets is empty.
I'll buy that.
Phil, do you still have a question?
Do you want to go back to your RRRR?
Yeah.
What is zero about?
So now we have to do some philosophy of mathematics. How far do you want to go?
Well, you've got 5 things, and it's a simple question, so pick one.
So I embrace a certain philosophy of mathematics according to which zero is not about anything. But there are many philosophies of mathematics which will give you a perfectly good answer to the question, what is zero about? So the empty set or something. So let's take the empty set. So Bertrand Russell thought that zero is about the empty set. It is the name of the empty set.
Yes.
So it would be a referring representational unit.
Well, exactly.
Nothing is a harder one. If you ask me what is nothing about, I would tell a joke.
Okay, jolly good. Second question.
It's a good joke, though.
All of your jokes are fantastic, Barry. I've read BFO. Middle Earth, right, are all non-referring representational units about Middle Earth, about the same Middle Earth?
No, of course
How
not.
many individual Middle Earths are there in your...
Well, you know the answers to those
I
questions.
don't, so that's why I'm asking you.
So there is no such thing that is designated by the phrase Middle Earth. So Middle Earth is not the phrase Middle Earth. I'm allowed to refer to the phrase. It really exists. Is not about anything. And therefore the question whether every occurrence of Middle Earth is about the same thing is moot. None of them are about anything.
So are they about the same non-anything, or are they about...
No, now you're being deliberately obtuse.
There's a question at the back there.
So, as you know, back to like the biology information, like a lot of measurement, right? So it is about, say, for example, sequencing data is about the sequence information. Now, when we get those information, there are probably some deviation from the reality. Is there any measurement about this, how much it deviates from the reality?
So one of the applications of this work, which Werner has been pursuing with great dedication, which I'm trying to help him with, goes like this. We all know that ontologies evolve over time, and they get better, we hope. And that means that more of the terms in the earlier ontologies, which were not about anything, are eliminated, and new terms are in the newer versions of the ontologies, which are about something. Now, the same thing applies to databases. There is an evolution, and the part of the purpose of this taxonomy here is to assist in the auditing of representational artifacts like ontologies and databases in order to measure precisely the referential quality, which is what we're really interested in, because we build these things because we want them to be about the world, of those artifacts. And now Werner was able to use this methodology, and I sent Philip an email about this earlier today, because he was searching for evidence that this kind of approach has some more than anecdotal value. Werner was able to use this methodology in order to gauge the quality of the work of all of the different members of the gene ontology consortium, because each term in the gene ontology And each annotation in the gene ontology database is identified as coming from the mouse or the rat or the other communities. And he could measure who was doing the best work along the dimension of whose work was subject to the least amount of retrospective correction. So we should pay the good people more and encourage the others to do better work.
We have time for one last quick question. I think, Mark, you were first.
Yeah, I really like this decomposition intellectual artifact. It's very sensible to me, and I think it's well thought out. I still have my problem still is at the top, though, and maybe you can help me, because I struggle with this all the time. How do I know when I'm dealing with an intellectual artifact, and how do I know when I'm dealing with a universal?
So there are universals which are instantiated by information artifacts. Universals like database, ontology, term, and so forth. And then there are other universals which are instantiated by stuff with molecules, the universal mouse or the universal chair. And then there are other universals which are instantiated by processes. For instance, the universal arm waving, which is being instantiated by me now. Does that help? It's not rocket science.
Well, I think there's enough ambiguity there that I feel discomfort.
Yeah, so we need to resolve your discomfort. So.